Brown and I went to the Basel Art Fair in Switzerland and turned our attention to a very young South African photographer, Mikhael Subotzky. Very striking images, and the images came out of a prison, African prisoners dressed in orange garments and singing in a choir in a semicircular composition, quite a large photomedia image that we felt strongly attracted to and bought. SCAF has as its focus Australian artists and artists from the Asia-Pacific region and the Middle East. And therefore, Mikhael wasn't really on my list as a potential artist for SCAF. Despite that, I became more and more sort of attracted to the idea of doing a Subotsky commission, and I decided to invite Mikel to come to Australia, visit the prison population here, and somehow make a work about Australian prisons, which would then sort of be shoehorned in a way into the template I had constructed for the SCAF newly commissioned projects. And he came. There was something so amazingly familiar about Mikhael for us growing up in South Africa. Once Mikhael came on the site visit, I decided that we would try and slot him in as a recipient of the project grant that SCAF as a foundation gives out, $100,000, and then more if we can raise extra money from outside sources. And he was asked to investigate the links somehow between Australia and South Africa, and therefore the Australian end of it was then going to fit into the framework that the foundation had been working within.
In that stage I didn't know what it would be at all, whether it would be a film or installation or photographs or whatever it might be. But in preparation for that trip I read Robert Hughes's The Fatal Shore. I was just incredibly struck by a particular chapter in that book called The Geographic Unconscious, where he speaks about how the Europeans imagined the Australian landscape. And I was very struck by the contrast between that imagination of the landscape and the contemporary imaginations of the Australian landscape by South Africans. And that kind of contrast became the kind of starting point. And after that I kind of drew the lines on the map to kind of show the relationship between England, South Africa and Australia, and came up with this triangle as this kind of initial kind of spatial context for the narrative of the films. I started thinking about all the kind of historical projections along the outsides of that triangle. Eventually it led me to these three characters. Each one of them is from one of the three geographic locations, England, Australia and South Africa. And just quite intuitively I realized that one of them I wanted to be a figure from the colonial past, one of them I wanted to be a contemporary figure, and once I had those it kind of made sense that Faye, the Australian character, would be a figure from the future. And these three kind of temporalities kind of work in unison with the three geographies to kind of create these kind of contrasts, but also similarities between these three figures. They each come from very different contexts. It wasn't obvious to me to make a fictional film, but the kind of interest that I've just described kind of led me there, even though to some degree they are based on historical events. So I did a lot of research and reading, and then very tentatively started trying to write a script.
He came up with this concept of WYE, and drew a symbolic line between England as the mother country, South Africa and Australia as two of England's colonies, and to imagine as a fictional narrative characters from each of these three places. He crossed 3 centuries, the 19th century, and set his English protagonist, Lethbridge, in that century, the 20th century, and he set his South African protagonist within the 20th, 21st century, and his Australian protagonist he set within an imagined future where mankind no longer had need for a body. and was able to imagine itself, individual human beings in other bodies going back in time as a form of anthropological investigation.
A lot of thought went into that, of how to kind of differentiate the three stories. You know, at one point very early on, there was an idea that one of them would be color, one of them would be black and white, another one a different kind of color. Then I made a decision that I didn't want any technical device to differentiate the story. I wanted them actually to have a common visual language in terms of the technique of filmmaking and construction of images. But I did want them to appear different. I did want it to be very clear if you look up at the screens which one is which. And in the end, a lot of it came from kind of the set and light. We planned to shoot the 3 different films at different times of the day and things like that. But in the end, the weather really helped us a huge amount. So for the first 2 days of shooting where we shot Lethbridge, we had this incredible variable weather where we had rain and then wind and then fog, and you know, it was incredibly tough conditions to shoot in, like exposed on the beach. But it couldn't have been better for the film. So you get a real sense of time progressing, because in his film, time progresses quite quickly. Like the 15 minutes of his film occurs in film time over a week or 2. So we were very, very lucky. The weather really helped us kind of create a mood of acceleration, that kind of time. And then the next 2 days of shooting was incredibly sunny and hot and kind of sharp, the light. The last 2 days, which was largely shot indoors, again, it didn't matter so much, but we kind of got the weather that we needed.
I struggled to come to terms with this third character, but now that I've seen the film, because of course it was shot in South Africa, in the Cape, and I didn't really see it until several weeks before the opening, I did grasp Theo ultimately, and now believe that these 3 protagonists across 3 time frames, with the complexities of each one searching for the other and going around in the shape of the Y between England and 2 of its former colonies, South Africa and Australia, each protagonist searching but not truly understanding the other in a kind of circular motion, accompanied by the most beautiful music, an old medieval refrain, as well as music composed by a current composer and colleague of Mikel's, that he has created something enormously special, quite exceptional in fact.